Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to hit rank 5 with on the Arena ladder. As you can see from the screenshot here, I'm currently 32-7 with this list, so it's been performing really well for me. Now I do want to preface that by saying that the Historic ladder definitely has felt a little bit softer since Timeless came out, so this is my first time returning to Historic since Timeless launched as a format, and there definitely have been more people playing lists that I wouldn't consider tier 1, so do take the record with a bit of a grain of salt because of that, but I still think this list is really strong and definitely capable of beating most of the top tier decks right now. As usual, there's going to be an importable deck list down in the description if you want to play the deck for yourself, and I'm also going to be writing a full in-depth article about this deck for MTGA Zone Premium that will have more details, a full sideboard guide, how I change the deck for best of one, and some tips and tricks to help you play the deck as well. So as soon as that's finished and up, I'll link that down in the description as well. And also for you Timeless Titan players, I am going to be making a new video with an updated Titan list because obviously the new show and tell versions are very good at counteracting my last game plan that I posted in the video a few days ago, so there will be a new version of Titan coming soon as well, so hold tight for that. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my Boros Kuldotha Convoke deck in Historic. So if you're not familiar with Convoke as an archetype, it's basically a go wide aggro deck that's looking to swarm the battlefield as quickly as possible, get a ton of power in play in the first few turns, and then just close the game out really quickly. So if you are familiar with this archetype from Pioneer and Explorer, you know how powerful Gleeful Demolition is. This is probably the most impactful card in those decks that enable the most broken starts, where you can go, for example, turn 1 3-bin Inspector, then turn 2 another 1-drop like Warden of the Inner Sky or Voldar and Epicure, into Gleeful Demolition on the artifact token, so in this case either the Clue token from Inspector or the Blood token from Voldar and Epicure, and then you have 5 creatures in play, and then you can just convoke either a Venerated Loxodon or a Knight Errant of Eos into play on turn 2, which is such a powerful start. And then the addition of Kuldotha Rebirth, giving you another 4 copies of the same effect, is so big for this archetype. I feel like Historic Convoke is basically not really a thing because it's basically just going to be playing the same thing that the Explorer version is in a more powerful format. But now with the addition of Kuldotha Rebirth, the consistency of those crazy fast starts goes up so much that I feel like this deck is really enabled by the addition of this. So having 8 copies of this really maximizes your chances of being able to get those crazy starts where you can convoke a Knight Errant or a Venerated Loxodon out on turn 2. Then in addition to that, another new card that we get from Murders at Karlov Manor is Novice Inspector. So essentially just another copy of 3-bin Inspector, right? Basically just exactly the same card but with a different name. So now we can run 4 Novice Inspector, 4 3-bin Inspector, and Voldar and Epicure to really maximize our chances of having those starts where we do go, you know, turn 1, 1-drop, turn 2, another 1-drop, and Gleeful Demolition or Kuldotha Rebirth into one of the Convoke cards, which is so difficult for any deck to stop. Even Control, you know, typically they would need Divine Purge as their sweeper to break the board apart, and then you still get to keep your Knight Errant or Venerated Loxodon in play because Divine Purge doesn't hit it. So really powerful, consistent starts off these. Then in addition to that, outside of that, you also have Warden of the Inner Sky, which is really solid with these sorts of 1-drop creatures that produce an artifact as well, because you can play Warden, then play a 3-bin Inspector, Novice Inspector or Voldar and Epicure, and then immediately just trigger it because you can tap the Clue or the Blood tokens to trigger it, and then, you know, you can keep scrying the top of your deck to find more gas. It'll eventually get Flying and Vigilance, and then you can just start attacking in the air as well. So Warden of the Inner Sky is really nice as a 1-drop that enables your Convoke plan, but is also a nice payoff for all of these creatures that produce artifacts when you don't have a Gleeful Demolition or Kuldotha Rebirth. So now let's have a closer look at the other cards in the deck, starting off here with Ornithopter, which is the perfect addition to a Convoke deck because it's 0 mana, which means it's very good at enabling our Convoke starts even when we don't have a Gleeful Demolition or Kuldotha Rebirth. And if we do have one of these, we can also just get them online on turn 1. You know, turn 1 we go 0 mana Ornithopter into Gleeful Demolition or Kuldotha Rebirth to get 3 1/1s on turn 1, which is such a powerful start as well. Then we've got 4 copies of Esper Sentinel, which is a really sick card in this deck. Obviously being as a 1 mana creature is great at enabling our Convoke plan as well. It is an artifact, so we can use it with Gleeful Demolition or Kuldotha Rebirth, although we're never really too happy to do that. We would much rather use it with one of the other cards, but it does improve our consistency slightly, right? If we do need to use one of these cards and we don't have another artifact, we can use it on Esper Sentinel if we need, but we're really utilizing this for the tax effect. Basically every single deck in the format right now is going to be leveraging non-creature spells, so if we can get this out on turn 1, it's really difficult for the opponent to not trigger this because they either have to play off curve, which is really good for us because then it enables us to apply more pressure because the opponent is slower to commit to the board, or they just start drawing us cards, which is really powerful in this particular deck, because oftentimes we need to keep one-landers in this deck, which we can do. This deck can operate on just a single land in a lot of scenarios, but it's very good at helping us assemble different cards if we need them as well. So for example, if we've kept a hand with like Ornithopter, Esper Sentinel, Novice Inspector and a Convoke card, then drawing a Gleeful Demolition or Kuldotha Rebirth in the first few turns enables those crazy broken early starts as well. So very good at helping us dig towards what we need. And then also buffing its power with cards like Venerated Loxodon, Case of the Gateway Express, and Invasion of Gobokan in the sideboard is really sick, because once you start boosting the power of Esper Sentinel, it becomes even more difficult for the opponent to play around it. And then on top of that as well, it's also incredibly good against the control decks, which are the decks that are scariest for us, because obviously being a go wide aggro deck, you're most vulnerable to board sweepers, so having Esper Sentinel as kind of a hedge against the control decks is really big as well. Then as I mentioned, we get Novice Inspector from Murders at Call of Mana and 3-Bin Inspector as well, so these are mainly here as enablers for Gleeful Demolition and Kuldotha Rebirth, but as I mentioned, the Clue token, very good with Warden of the Inner Sky, and then you can also grind into longer games fairly consistently with this deck as well. You know, once you do get access to more mana, if the opponent is able to stabilize against your early aggression, you can just use these to draw cards, keep digging through your deck and finding what you need, which is really nice as well. Then Warden of the Inner Sky, kind of gone over this one already, but it's just a really nice payoff for when you have a lot of permanents in play, especially if you have these creatures that can produce artifact tokens, as a way to just scry towards more gas. And also giving a creature flying and vigilance is very good at being able to attack over ground creatures against a deck like the Geist Leyline deck, for example. One of the best ways that you can beat that deck is just, you know, get a bunch of these early permanents in play, keep activating Warden until you turn it into a 4/5 flyer, and then you can just start blocking the Geist and the flying creatures in the air as well. So a lot of matchups where the flying and vigilance is relevant on this as well. Then Gleeful Demolition and Kuldotha Rebirth, already gone over these, just the most powerful cards in the deck that enable these really fast starts. Voldaren Epicure, basically here for the same reason that 3-Bin Inspector and Novice Inspector are. The reason I've gone for 3 of these and then both 4 of these Inspectors here is because, first of all, I feel like the Clue token is more valuable than the Blood token in general anyway, but mainly also because when we do have these crazy starts where we can convoke these Knight Errant Evios and Venerated Loxodon out on turn 2, you need to have a white creature in play or you can't convoke it with no lands untapped. And if you're running 4 Voldaren Epicure, there will be some starts where you have, say, 2 Epicures and a Kuldotha Rebirth and then a Venerated Loxodon, and then because all of your creatures are red, you can't convoke with the Loxodon or the Knight Errant Evios. So I prefer both of the Inspectors for those reasons, but Epicure is still really nice here. Gets in for an extra point of damage when it enters the battlefield, which is definitely relevant in a deck like this where you're just trying to apply as much pressure to the opponent's life total as possible. So Epicure, really nice for improving consistency. And then the other new card in the main deck here from Murders at Call of Mana is Case of the Gateway Express. So I saw a lot of people playing this one in Standard and I really wanted to test it out here, and it has really, really impressed me. So this is basically a 2-mana card that is a removal spell when it ETBs, and then once you attack with 3 creatures, it turns into an Anthem effect. So this is so nice in the deck because it gives you some main deck removal, which is really important against a lot of decks that are good at gumming up the ground. So against Mono Green Devotion, for example, being able to just use this to take out something like a Polukranos Reborn or an Old Growth Troll to clear the board is really big. But basically just in general, getting a way to take the opponent's biggest creature out, and it does take out much bigger creatures as well because you can swarm the battlefield really quickly. So this can take out creatures of any size once you do start swarming, and then you also get this Anthem effect as well. But the biggest reason why I'm really excited about this card is because it's 2 mana and we don't really have other good options in this slot outside of that. So in older formats like Modern and Pioneer, you have the Bushwhackers as cards that kind of fill this slot as, you know, cheap creatures that you can kick to buff your board. In Historic and also Explorer, we don't have access to either of those, so the next best options that we have are Regal Leosaur, which I'm not really very high on because if the opponent kills the creature that you're trying to mutate onto, then you don't get the board buff effect, so I'm not really very high on that card, apart from in the sideboard against decks that aren't running a lot of interaction. And then the other card that I've been running in that slot in these sorts of formats for a little while now is Imidane's Recruiter, which I do think is a very powerful effect, but the big difference between that is it's 3 mana as opposed to 2 mana here, and in terms of deck building, that makes an enormous difference because in this sort of deck, if you are running Imidane's Recruiter, you need to run a pretty high land count. If we're looking at the lands in this deck, we're only running 17, and if I was running Imidane's Recruiter, I wouldn't want to be running any less than 20 lands because you really need to be hitting your 3rd land for that to work consistently. And then the risk of doing that is you're going to be flooding out in a lot more games. So Case of the Gateway Express, just a generically good card that fills this slot really nicely, gives removal and also that board buff effect. But the fact it's 2 mana means that we can go low on lands and we can operate as a deck that never needs to draw more than 2 lands, which which is a really big deal in terms of improving the consistency and ensuring that you don't flood out, if that makes sense. So this card really fills this slot very well. And just having main deck removal is also very good, improves your matchup against decks like Wizards as well. So I've been really impressed with this card. Then already kind of gone over these as well, but Knight Errant of Eos and Venerated Loxodon is our main Convoke payoffs here. Knight Errant of Eos is obviously just very good at, ensuring you don't run out of gas, getting a big creature in play, helping us dig towards our other creatures. Now, the one downside of Case of the Gateway Express with regards to Knight Errant of Eos is it isn't a creature, so we unfortunately can't find our Bushwhacker or Imidane's Recruiter off the Knight Errant of Eos anymore, which does slightly reduce its utility a little bit, but it's not really been an issue for me. You can still find Warden of the Inner Sky, which does kind of a similar thing if you don't have a, if you do need a way to kind of apply more pressure, you still have a creature here that can go over the top of what the opponent's trying to do. So Knight Errant of Eos, even without a Bushwhacker or Imidane's Recruiter, is still a really powerful card in this deck for sure. And then Venerated Loxodon, very good card at applying pressure early on, enables these crazy broken starts with Gleeful Demolition and Kuldotha Rebirth, works incredibly well with Esper Sentinel, putting counters on Warden of the Inner Sky gets it closer to Flying and Vigilance as well. So these are kind of stock. I'm sure you're familiar with them if you've played with Convoke, but still work very nicely in this deck as well. The mana base, as I mentioned, running Case of the Gateway Express over Imidane's Recruiter really enables us to run a low land count. As I mentioned, we don't need to ever really have more than 2 lands in order to win the game, and oftentimes you can just win off 1 land as well in certain scenarios. So 17 lands has felt like a good amount to me. You don't really have to worry about flooding, and like I said, we don't really ever need more than the second land as well. Then in terms of the actual lands themselves, I do feel since we're running a very low land count that you really want all of your lands to be dual lands, because if you're running stuff like the Pathways and you only have 1 land, you can only cast half the cards in your deck, right? You usually have to put it on white because most of the cards are white, but then that shuts you off using Gleeful Demolition and Kuldotha Rebirth. So having dual lands is very important. So we've obviously got Sacred Foundry and Inspiring Vantage, which are kind of staples in these low to the ground 2-color aggro decks. Sunbaked Canyon is also a really great addition because this is just a good way to mitigate flood. This is kind of perfect in these sorts of aggro decks because you can just cycle it if you do end up flooding out. And then the downside of running this alongside a card like Battlefield Forge is the mana base will sometimes do a lot of damage to you, but you are so much faster than most of the decks in the format, so taking a bit of damage off the mana base isn't really too much of a big deal. And like I said, you really want all of your lands to be tapping for both colours of mana in the early game and entering untapped early on as well. And then I also do feel like 1 basic is very important as well because, control decks are still running stuff like Field of Ruin, so you do want to hedge against that somewhat. And then we also get Gigantha as the companion. Now, as I said, this deck doesn't really need to it doesn't need more than 2 lands to operate what it's trying to do, and we do have a very low land count, so you might think that Gigantha doesn't come up very often, but you'd be surprised. There will be some games that go long, especially against the interactive decks. Even with 17 lands, sometimes you will end up flooding out and drawing a bunch of cards, and especially in the longer games, if you do end up needing to use the clue tokens off Novice Inspector or Thraben Inspector, for example, you sometimes will get up to 5 lands, and the Gigantha has come up. And especially in a deck like this, where you're very high synergy, you can't really afford to sideboard too much without taking away from your proactive game plan, which means that sideboard slots aren't really too tight in this deck, so I definitely think it's worth dedicating a sideboard slot to Gigantha, just for the utility in the games where you do end up flooding out. So that's the main deck. As I said, Kuldotha Rebirth adds so much consistency to this sort of game plan. Until this card came out, I don't really think Convoke was really viable in Historic. Now with this and Gleeful Demolition, and also these new additions like Novice Inspector and Case of the Gateway Express, I really feel like the deck has a ton of extra consistency to enable those really fast broken starts that a lot of decks struggle to deal with. So next up we'll have a look at the sideboard, and this is an area where I've been going back and forth in terms of the numbers of these cards, and as you'll see in the gameplay, there will be some games where I have a slightly different sideboard configuration as I'm testing stuff out, but this configuration right here is definitely how I would run things going forward. I'm really happy with the numbers split here. So let's just have a look at it. Starting off here with 3 copies of Drannith Magistrate. So this might look like a weird card because it's not really a commonly played sideboard card in Historic, but the main reason I'm running this card is because the Discover Geological Appraiser deck is very difficult to race with this list because, we can kill very quickly, but they can pretty consistently kill on turn 3 or 4, which is often going to be good enough to race us. So post-sideboard, I really wanted to have a high density of cards to be able to stop them comboing off, just to buy us enough time to be able to race. And we've already got Invasion of Gobekhan here, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. This is also a very important card against the Discover decks, but Drannith Magistrate is just another card that just stops them comboing off, just to buy you an extra turn or 2 to be able to race, which is really important against the Appraiser decks. And then it also applications in some other matchups as well. So for example, you can bring this in against Kethis combo to stop them casting cards from the graveyard, but generally this is just here as a good hate card against the Discover decks to try and flip that matchup on its head post sideboard. Then we've got 3 copies of Phyrexian Revoker, which is a really important card against Yawgmoth specifically. So Yawgmoth is obviously, you know, the card Yawgmoth is very good against you because you have a lot of very small creatures. So if they can get Yawg out early, they can just start picking your board apart, which makes it very difficult to attack past. So Revoker just shuts off the most impactful card from their deck. Naming Yawgmoth on this is pretty difficult for them to deal with because the main way that they answer hate cards like this, and the main reason that I'm running Revoker over Pithing Needle, is because it can't be killed by Haywireite, which is a thing that they can commonly call of calling for. And then on top of that, the other big advantage of Revoker over Pithing Needle is that it's a creature, so not only does it enable our Convoke game plans because we can use this to Convoke, but we can also find it off Knight Errant of Eos as well, which is really, really important, you know, especially against that Yawgmoth. Being able to dig for a Revoker sort of card off the Knight Errant to preemptively shut off Yawgmoth is really big. And then it's also really important against other creature-based combos as well. Samwise is another deck that can race you as well. They can win on turn 3 a lot of the time, turn 4 as well, which means that if you're on the draw, it's quite difficult to race. So having Revoker there to name Cauldron Familiar to shut off their combo side is really good at buying you enough time to race. And also, you know, this is another card that you can bring in against Kethis combo as well. And we got 2 copies of Strangle here as just additional interaction on top of Case of the Gateway Express. So this is here primarily for the Wizards matchup. So, you know, as you'll see in the gameplay coming up, when I faced the Wizards deck in the gameplay that I've got recorded, I wasn't originally running Strangle, and there were, you know, especially using this to take out something like a Dreadhorde Arcanist is really big. So I really like having a couple copies of Strangle just to increase the amount of interaction that we've got against a deck like Wizards. Also very nice against a deck like Ninjas to be able to cut them off their early creatures to make them, you know, slows them down a lot off their ninjutsu effects. So Strangle, I feel, is really nice. I don't really feel like you want to be running more than 2 though, because this is, as I said, a deck that is very high synergy. So bringing in a lot of non-creature spells does slow down your proactive game plan. So 2's felt like a good amount here. Then we got 4 copies of Invasion of Gobekhan. So this is one of the most important sideboard cards. First of all, against the Control matchup. So as I mentioned, Control is a scary matchup because sweepers are the best way to fight your deck. But Invasion of Gobekhan just feels like the best card against Control. So typically against Control, I bought out Case of the Gateway Express because they run very few creatures, if any at all, and bring in the 4 Invasion of Gobekhan. And this is just so good against them because you can use this early on, get rid of their sweeper or whatever their most impactful card is, then attack down the invasion to get the light shield array, which then protects your whole board from Supreme Verdict and stuff like that. Obviously it doesn't protect from Divine Purge, but the front side of Invasion of Gobekhan can, you know, tax the Divine Purge to stop them playing it. And also Divine Purge doesn't hit your Knight Errant of Eos and Venerated Loxodon as well. So Invasion of Gobekhan, just by far and away the best card against Control. And then as I mentioned, also a very important card against other combo decks like the Geological Appraiser deck. As I mentioned, they on average are much faster than us at killing. So having 4 Invasion of Gobekhan, 3 Dynamite Magistrate just really ensures that we can flip the matchup on its head post sideboard. Without 7 or 8 of these sorts of effects, you do have to mulligan more aggressively. And one thing with this deck is you really don't want to be mulliganing much at all if you can avoid it, because you're a deck that really cares about having a high density of resources. So having 7 post sideboard cards against combo decks like the Discover deck really ensures that you can not have to mulligan too often, but still cut them off their combo, if that makes sense. And then finally, we've got 2 copies of Thalia as well. So originally, I was just running 4 Invasion of Gobekhan against the Control decks, which did feel good enough to win in a lot of scenarios, but especially against builds of Control that was sideboarding into a lot of sweepers. You know, I've come across some builds that were running 8 or more sweepers post sideboard, which might be an anomaly, but some people are still doing this on ladder. I did feel like we wanted Thalia in addition to Invasion of Gobekhan, and having 6 of these effects, you know, really increases your chances of drawing at least one of them to cut them off that early sweeper, which then enables you to force enough damage through to go for lethal. And then there are obviously some other matchups where Thalia is going to be good, you know, generally non-creature combo decks as well. This is very effective against. And then again, similar to Revoker and Janeth Magistrate, it's also very nice that you can find this off the Knight Errant of Eos as well. So that's the deck overall. You know, like I said, it's been very powerful. With the addition of Kuldotha Rebirth, these kind of crazy fast starts are very consistent as well. So it's very difficult for a lot of decks to deal with when you have these very fast starts. And then having main deck removal in Case of the Gateway Express that also doubles up as an Anthem effect has felt really nice as well. So I felt like this deck is very generically powerful, has good tools in the sideboard to fight a lot of the top tier decks, and has also been a blast to play as well. So next up, I've got some gameplay with the deck so you guys can see it in action. If you've got any questions about the deck at all, definitely let me know in the comments, and I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up. Okay, so we're going second here. Okay, just had to edit there because the opponent took a while to connect to the game, but can't keep a no-lander here, unfortunately, which kind of sucks because you really don't want to mulligan with this deck if you can avoid it. This hand I am happy to keep, though. Obviously, not having the second land is a little bit annoying, but you can win with just one land with this deck. I think I'm going to put Warden of the Inner Sky back here because I really want to have the turn 1 Sentinel because, you know, if the opponent does end up giving us a draw here, that finding of the second land will be very big because we potentially have, you know, Sentinel on 1 into Epicure Demolition Knight Errant on turn 2, which is a really powerful start. So, Delighted Halfling probably either going to be Devotion or Yawgmoth here. So I'm really hoping... Oh, wow. I was going to say I'm really hoping they give us a draw off Esper Sentinel. Wow. Main deck, pick your poison. I did not expect to see that. So that's a little bit annoying. We didn't find the second land here. So going to be a little bit of a slower start here. We can still go Gleeful Demolition next turn. If we do find another land here, then we can go for the Knight Errant, but... might just be a case where, you know, especially against Devotion, it's a little bit too slow. So we are going to go for Kuldotha Rebirth here. I'm really surprised to see Pick Your Poison in the main deck. I guess it kind of makes sense because Wizards is the worst matchup for Devotion, and it does answer Symmetry Sage and Balmor, which are probably the most tricky cards for you to deal with, but I feel like it's probably going to be dead in a lot of matchups. Maybe it's a good sideboard card, though. Not sure. But yeah, that's kind of a surprising card to see in the main deck. Okay, yeah, I think this is probably going to be a situation where missing the second land... Okay, we do have the second land now. I was going to say maybe this is a situation where missing the second land is going to make our start too slow here. But, you know, we've still got a chance here. We can Convoke for 4 here, get the Knight Errant down, and then potentially go for a Case of the Gateway next turn. But we kind of have to hope that the opponent doesn't have a crazy turn the following turn. But here we can go... Ornithopter and then Gleeful Demolition. So we are going very wide here. We can potentially attack around their creatures, but, you know, Devotion can have some crazy turns. If they go, you know, Storm the Festival into untap the Nykthos, then even this wide board might be too small. Okay, there's an Old Growth Troll. So that does give them a lot of access to, access to a lot of mana off this Cure at untap. Okay, into Utopia Sprawl. So now they get 9 mana off the Nykthos here, so really want to avoid seeing Storm the Festival. Khan could potentially grab the One Ring or Sky Sovereign. Oh, okay, they do have Storm the Festival, so I think this might just be a case of, you know, us missing the second land was just a little bit rough, and them having Pick Your Poison as well. I was not expecting, you know, both the Yawgmoth and Devotion typically don't have any interaction in the early game at all, so... So they D- on the Khan. Only got access to 4 mana though. I guess they could have Esseka's Chariot. They could have the One Ring. Ah, okay. They just go for Liquid Metal Coating. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I think this might just be a case where our start was a little bit too slow. Missing that second land was kind of brutal, and them having an answer to the Sentinel as well was a little bit rough. I mean, having said that though, if we can draw a land off the top, we can go Case of the Gateway Express, kill the Polukranos, attack, and buff our whole board. Okay, we did draw a land off the top, so this definitely isn't over yet, right? We can go Case of the Gateway Express here. Take out the Polukranos, I think, because they still get to keep the triple Devotion off the Old Growth Troll if we do kill it. And then I think we have to take out the Khan here, right? Taking out the Cure does deny them a lot of mana, but... yeah, I think we have to attack everything with the Cure. So Khan is dying here regardless. They can block the Knight Errant to stop us killing Cure. Maybe we're supposed to do it the other way round, but even if, you know... Even if we do take out the Khan... Oh, sorry, if we take out the Kiora here, then they still have access to at least, you know, 8 mana next turn. They could just grab a Cityscape Leveler or a Portal to Phyrexia. So this way, there's a chance that the opponent might whiff off the Storm the Festival. And now we do have a pretty big board, right? We've got everything buffed from Case of the Gateway Express. So we've given ourselves a chance to win here, basically. Okay, Cavalier's a bit annoying because now they can just untap and still flash back the Storm the Festival. And they find another one here, so... I mean, this kind of shows the power of this deck, though. We were pretty far behind, and now we at least have a shot, which is kind of, you know, not an easy thing to do, especially against a deck like Devotion that can go so far over the top of what you're doing. So I think here... they got another Cavalier. So I think here we've just got to hope that they whiff off these Storm the Festivals. Right, there is just a chance they just hit like lands and mana dorks, which then gives us a chance to potentially attack around them. And they do have to kill their Kiora to untap here as well, which does cut them off a Devotion and slows them down on future turns as well. Oh, they just have another one, okay. So yeah, this one going to be tricky to win. We don't really have anything to follow up in our hand here, really. You know, maybe if we drew another case of the Gateway Express, that could be good, but you know, we basically need them to whiff here off this Storm the Festival. Oh wow, okay. So now they can flashback the other Storm the Festival. Yeah, this is going to be really tricky to win. But I mean, having said that, I think if we had found the second land on curve and not stumbled on mana a little bit, we would have been able to get to the, you know, commit to the board earlier, attack down the Khan straight away. So I do think on the whole this matchup has felt favourable so far in testing, but you know, if you stumble against Devotion or they have a fast start or both, you're really in trouble. Okay, they've just got the Akrama's Memorial, so that's just lethal, right? Yeah, they're just attacking with everything, so kind of unfortunate, but I do think we have the advantage in this matchup in general. I don't really have anything in this sideboard specifically for this matchup. You know, there is maybe an argument between whether you want to run Invasion of Gobekhan or Case of the Gateway Express, because Invasion is obviously good at, you know, cutting them off their top end stuff, but I think Case of the Gateway Express is much more important because being able to commit to the battlefield early and then use Case of the Gateway Express to take out a Polluchronos or an Old Growth Troll, then attack down their Planeswalkers potentially is such a big deal. You know, you don't. The issue with Invasion of Gobekhan is if they resolve a 1 or 2 Old Growth Trolls, you just can't really attack past that. Wow. I'm going to keep this. This is another hand where if we can draw the second land, then we're good, because every other land in the deck outside of the plains is a dual land. And if they have a hand with Utopia Sprawl, they're basically forced to give us a card off the Sentinel here. Okay, they do, so that's perfect. Didn't draw a land off the top, so that Sentinel's going to be big. Oh, yikes, okay. Didn't draw the second land. I still feel like this hand is worth the risk, though, because if we do draw that second land, we can go Thraben Inspector or Novice Inspector into Rebirth, into Venerated Loxodon. Okay, they go for Utopia Sprawl. Let's see if they pay the Sentinel tax here. Oh, they don't. Okay, so we get to draw land here. So this is the other thing as well. We're on the play in this matchup, so I think missing a land for a single turn isn't going to be too much of a big deal either. Well, having said that, they do have Cura. They can potentially untap this land and play like an Old Growth Troll or a Polluchronos here, which could be a little bit rough. But I still think, you know, this next turn is going to be very, very powerful for us. Okay, Wolfwillow Haven. Perfect. Very, very happy to see that. So now we can go one of the Inspectors into Rebirth, into Venerated Loxodon. Now, we do have 6 creatures here, so we could potentially... I'm not sure what creature we don't want to Convoke. I think... Like, obviously, you want to be using Loxodon with Sentinel in general, right? Because you want to buff its power. But at this point in the game, I think I'm just going to Convoke everything else. I don't think having 2 Sentinels as 2/2s is really going to matter too much in this specific matchup. And I would rather just take a damage on the Cura. I feel like that's more likely to matter as the game goes along. And now 2 Case of the Gateway Express. Obviously, they could have some crazy turns here, but Case will be able to take out any of the creatures they play at this point, even if they play a Cavalier. And then we get a buff as well off the attack trigger, or once we solve the case, what I mean. Okay, they give us another draw of the Sentinel. Now we have 3 Case of the Gateway Expresses, so... Okay, they do find a Cavalier, but we can just take that out immediately, which is pretty big. So we'll see if they untap with Cura. Okay, they do untap with Cura, so they might have Cavalier into something else. But that's still fine, right? We're definitely going to be able to take out one of their creatures. Even if they follow this up with a Polluchronos or an Old Growth Troll, you know, we can still very cleanly attack this turn. I don't mind losing one of my creatures, and then we can Case of the Gateway Express the next turn. Maybe even double Case of the Gateway Express if we draw another land off the top. Wow, they Besage the Sentinel. Interesting. So we get a land off that, which I'm very happy to see. Unfortunately, that means that this Inspiring Vantage is going to enter play tapped, which does mean that we can't double Case of the Gateway Express this turn, but we don't really need to because they didn't have another creature here. So now we can Case of the Gateway Express, take out the Cavalier, and this is why I love this card. It just gives you plays like this where, you know, previous Convoke decks would really struggle to attack past the Cavalier of Thorns. Now we get to take it out and then attack and get a buff to our whole board as well. So I think I want to play Warden of the Inner Sky over the other cards because we might potentially want to activate the Warden of the Inner Sky to give it buffs before we attack next turn, if that makes sense. And now we get to solve the case, we get a whole bit buff to our board, and now I feel pretty confident about this spot, because even if they get 2 creatures in play, we can double Case of the Gateway Express next turn, which is going to be really difficult for them to beat. Now with the buff from Case of the Gateway Express, they have to pay 2 for the Sentinel tax, so even though the opponent does have Kiora and a bunch of mana off Nykthos into Storm the Festival, I still feel pretty good about this spot. Now obviously if they go, you know, Storm into 2 Cavaliers and mill over another one, that's going to be kind of tough, but they wouldn't have enough mana to flash it back, so wow, okay, they kind of whiff, but they have enough mana here to Storm again. No, I don't think they do. Okay, opponent just scoops it up. I mean, we would have had double Case of the Gateway Express next turn as a follow-up anyway, so even if they had hit much better off Storm the Festival, I still feel like we're definitely a favourite there. So going into game 3 on the draw is going to be a little bit tougher, but, you know, we did manage to win that game missing our second land. So, you know, if we can have a better curve out this game, that's going to be pretty good. So here we don't have a Convoke card, but we have Case of the Gateway Express. We have potentially 3 1/1s on turn 1. We have Warden of the Inner Sky as well as another payoff. So even though this hand would be faster with a Convoke card, I'm happy to keep this one. Again, no turn 1 play. I'm very surprised to see that. So here I think I'm just going to go for the turn 1 Gleeful Demolition, because then we can, you know, kill more stuff with Case of the Gateway Express next turn. I guess against Devotion, the difference between 3 and 4 is pretty big. So, oh, wow, they kept a 1-lander without a turn 1 play. I mean, I'm very surprised to see that. I mean, having said that, we still have a very fast start. So even if they have, like, a reasonable regular Devotion start, I still feel like we're in a pretty good spot here. So, going to scroll up to the bottom. I think we're just looking for more Case of the Gateway Expresses or one of the Convoke cards at this point. See if they drew their second land here. Okay, they did. So it's basically like we were on the play this game because they missed that land. Oh, okay. They kept a 1-lander Utopia Sprawl with Seiju hand. Interesting. Okay. Knight Errant of Eos is kind of exactly what we were looking for here. We want to hold on to Case of the Gateway Express in case they play a creature here. Maybe I'm supposed to Convoke before playing the Voldaran Epicures just in case we find a Sentinel. Yeah, that was probably a misplay. I'm probably meant to... Actually, I don't know, because this enables us to... Yeah, we did find a Sentinel, but yeah, this line allows us to attack, get in for extra damage this turn, but maybe if the opponent is struggling, I should have... Convoked first and kept a mana available. Not 100% sure on that one. I think it's pretty small margins. Okay, another Knight Errant's pretty interesting. I think I want to keep that on top, and then we can get in for 2 here. We could have held 1 back to get another Warden trigger, but I don't think I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. We're already swarmed on the board. They're really going to struggle to come back from this. Okay, they just play an Old Growth Troll. So now we just go Case of the Gateway Express. Take out the Old Growth Troll, and then that should be lethal, right? Pretty sure, because now we can activate Warden of the Inner Sky again, get in for lethal, and even if this wasn't lethal, we would have a crazy amount of power in play because of the Case of the Gateway Express buff next turn. So we got there, nice. Okay, so we're going second here. And I think we've got to mold. There's too many lands in this hand. This one, 1 land, obviously we would prefer to spot one of these creatures for a second land, but I think we can keep this, especially on the draw, right? We're pretty likely to draw another land, especially with the turn 1 Sentinel here. Okay, Lair of the Hider from the opponent makes me think it's Devotion, but no turn 1 play from them is very nice to see. Wow, they trigger the Sentinel as well. So we do find the second land. So this is huge. Now we can have a really fast start where we go turn 2 Inspector into... I'm going to use the Kuldotha Rebirth because the nice thing about Gleeful Demolition, especially against Devotion, is that we can use the Demolition to potentially kill artifacts that they could fetch off Karn. You can obviously use it as a 1-mana, destroy the opponent's artifact, but we get a 6 start here. We get Inspector, we get Loxodon. Wow, yeah, opponent just scoops it up. I mean, that's going to be really tough for Devotion to beat. So here against Devotion again, I don't think there's really too much in this sideboard that we've got for this matchup. Again, there's the debate whether you want to go for Invasion or Case against Devotion, but I just think Case is just generally the much better card out of the two. So, but yeah, overall, this matchup is definitely favoured for the Convoke side, I think, but, definitely not an auto win because... especially if you're on the draw, they can commit to the battlefield pretty quickly. And again, you know, a lot of it just depends on how fast your start is compared to how quickly they can get their big creatures in play, right? But even on the draw in game 2 here, I still think we have the upper hand. Just depends, you know, again, if we have starts like that where we can just get a Convoke creature out on turn 2, it's really tricky for them to beat. So this hand we don't have a Gleeful Demolition or a Kuldotha Rebirth, but with Sentinel Double Ornithopter we can still get Loxodon online very quickly here, so definitely happy to keep this one. And obviously we've got, you know, 2 looks at a Kuldotha Rebirth sort of effect. Okay, so turn 1 Utopia Sprawl, obviously a much better start for the opponent this time. So here I'm just going to run out this Sentinel, and I'm going to run out both Ornithopters here just in case we draw Case here and we want to use it immediately. Probably won't, but especially against Devotion, I don't think there's any reason not to just run it out here. So now we can just go Inspector into Epicure into Loxodon here, which not quite as fast as... Well, I guess it is kind of, you know, pretty much as fast as last game. Obviously, it would be slightly better if we had a Rebirth or a Gleeful Demolition because... You know, buffing a 1-1 as opposed to an 0-2 here is obviously better, but... Wow, did the opponent miss a land drop? Surely they've got something for 3 mana, though. Maybe they've got... Okay, they do have the land, sure. See what else they've got here. Okay, just go for another Old Growth Troll, so not a bad draw for the opponent. Oh, wow, okay, that's a sick draw. So this is why I like Case in this matchup as opposed to Invasion, because this is probably just going to win us the game here, I'd imagine, right? They are at 19, but buffing our whole board here is absolutely huge. They're going to need a crazy turn next turn to stabilize against us. Okay, they block the Loxodon, which I'm not too unhappy about because that clears their board, but it does unlock a lot of mana for them, right? They put this on the same land. Okay, they put it on a different land. I was going to say if they put it on the same land, they can just cast Cura for positive mana at this point. But now they have access to a ton of mana, so we have kind of effectively ramped them, but... We have a lot of power in play. Okay, there is Storm the Festival. That's kind of scary. So if they go like double Cavalier here, that might be a little bit tricky. But having said that, we did draw the Knight Errant, so we can slow roll things a little bit, especially because they don't have a Nykthos yet. But again, if they hit double Cavalier, their chances of finding a Nykthos are pretty high. But yeah, overall, I feel pretty good about this spot. Okay, that's not the worst hit, not the best hit for the opponent, but... We should definitely be able to just attack through this, I think. So here we could just attack, but with this Case in play, I think I'm just going to go for the Knight Errant here, try and find 2 more 1-drops, and then just go for a big lethal attack next turn. Because we can still get in for 2 damage off the Ornithopter, and this should hopefully basically just guarantee lethal next turn. Okay, so we do have enough creatures here to be able to go Ornithopter into Loxodon. So we don't attack in at all here, but this should basically be guaranteed lethal for next turn. You know, had I not had the Anthem effect from the Case, using Knight Errant as opposed to just attacking there is a little bit more risky, but the opponent does have big creatures to be able to block, so... Okay, they don't find a Nykthos off that Cavalier, that's pretty big, because that would have unlocked a lot of mana for them otherwise. But yeah, I feel like we should just have lethal here, unless the opponent has, you know, a pretty crazy turn. I believe they've played a land for turn already. Or I'm pretty sure they would play Nykthos anyway. Yeah, okay. Opponent just scoops it up, so we got there. Nice. Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, very happy to keep this one, right? If we can draw another 1-drop, then we can go Knight Errant on turn 2. Even without another 1-drop, we can go Knight Errant on turn 2, but we don't get the full Convoke 5. So definitely going to be leading on the Novice Inspector here. And then next turn, I mean, it looks like the opponent might be on Control here, if I had to guess. In which case, I think going for Gleeful Demolition first is a little bit safer. Because if, you know, with Kuldotha Rebirth, you have to sacrifice the artifact as a cost. So if they have a counter spell, I would much rather they counter the Gleeful Demolition because we get to keep the clue token. So let's see if the opponent has a counter spell here. Okay, they do. No more lies. Interesting. So now we can Kuldotha Rebirth, which means we don't get to Convoke this turn, unfortunately. But we can next turn. We also have Case of the Gateway Express as kind of like an Anthem effect as well. Obviously, really want to try and fade a Divine Purge here if we can. That would be obviously worst possible in this spot, but... Okay, looks like the opponent doesn't have it, which is huge. So Here, I think we'll just lead on the Knight Errant here. If they have a counterspell, so be it. You know, unfortunately, we don't have enough to pay for No More Lies, but I still think I'm just going to jam it here, right? If they have it, they have it. If they don't, or if they do have a counterspell, we can still just play Case of the Gateway Express to get it in play now. You know, again, the only real disadvantage to doing that is if the opponent's on strict Proctor, Lotus Field, but, we haven't seen either of those, so just want to get the case in play now. And now we basically just got access to an Anthem effect as long as we can attack with 3 creatures here. Now, if I wasn't going to put Gigantha in hand, it would obviously be better to play the Sunbaked Canyon because then we can draw a card, but I think I'm going to put the Gigantha into play here. Oh, wow, okay, they Fragment Reality the case, so they do reduce the buff here. Now, obviously, Esper Sentinel is very good against control, but I really just want to apply as much pressure as possible here. They could very well have Supreme Verdict, but I don't really feel like we're beating Supreme Verdict. Even if they do have Verdict, we still have Gigantha as a follow-up play here. Wow, they just charmed to draw 2. But yeah, my point was there is that I think our chances of winning this game are significantly higher if we just jam the Gleeful Demolition, get 3 more creatures into play. And, if they have a sweeper, we're probably not going to beat that by holding on to the Gleeful Demolition, because if they have a sweeper, they take out the Esper Sentinel anyway, which removes our only target for it. Here, Venerate Loxodon, I could very well see an argument for just attacking, but I'm just going to Convoke here while we can, because again, if they have a sweeper, Loxodon kind of goes offline, if that makes sense. I'm not going to run out the Gigantha, though, because I feel like we have enough pressure in play here where if they do have if they don't have a sweeper, we should be good to win. If they do have a sweeper, I want to hold on to the Gigantha as a follow-up play, if that makes sense. Okay, they just didn't find a sweeper. Sweet, so we got there nice. And then that's really nice stealing game 1 against control, because now post-sideboard, we can cut the Case of the Gateway Express, bring in the Invasion of Gobakans, and then we're good. I've also been debating sideboarding some numbers of Thalia. Been going back and forth on that. I think, obviously this is a matchup where I would want the Thalia, so whether I end up using it or not will largely come down to how important I feel the other sideboard cards are in other matchups. And I do feel like there's a bit of wiggle room, so I definitely could see going up a couple of Thalias in addition to the Invasion of Gobakan, but I'm going to keep testing, trying different numbers out, and see if I can afford to make room, because there are other cards that are very important in other matchups. I feel like Phyrexian Revoker, for example, is very important against the Yawgmoth deck, so you do want to have a decent number of them, or that matchup's very difficult. Okay, I'm going to keep this one. Obviously, this is hand. I was going to say this is a hand that's pretty weak to sweepers, but I'm going to lead on Warden into triple Ornithopter here. I could also see an argument to just going Ornithopter Gleeful Demolition. Actually, thinking about it, that was probably a misplay on my part. I think it's probably better to go Ornithopter Gleeful Demolition, because then we've got 3 threats in play as opposed to this hand. If they'd had a removal spell for Warden, then Invasion isn't a guaranteed flip. Okay, we get to hit the Divine Purge, which is huge here. Now we can buff the Warden of the Inner Sky, attack, and just flip the Invasion straight away. But yeah, I think this was definitely a unnecessarily risky line from me to take. If I go Ornithopter Gleeful Demolition, then we can just go, Invasion on turn 2, attack the Invasion down with 3 different creatures, and then we wouldn't have been very vulnerable to something like a Fragment Reality or a Get Lost, for example. Okay, opponent drew a Fateful Absence, so this is kind of why, if they'd had that a turn sooner, it would have been a lot riskier. Or, it would have been a lot riskier, basically, because, we wouldn't have been able to get any damage in on the Invasion of Gobakan. So I do think I misplayed there in the early game, but thankfully we weren't punished. Or we haven't been punished too bad. So they've obviously got that Divine Purge in exile, so if they draw another land, they can play that next turn. Okay, Knight Errant Reveals is a very big draw here, because they can't counter it with either of the counterspells that they've got in hand. And if they do cast Divine Purge, the Knight Errant obviously survives it as well, which is pretty big. I do want to maximize the amount of buffs I get off the Light Shield Array, though. And again, if we do find, 1-drops off this Knight Errant Reveals, I want to hold them to be able to follow up the Purge with, if that makes sense. Okay, sweet. So we hit 2 1-drops. That's great. Now we can attack him with everything. Get an additional buff from the Light Shield Array. Even if they do draw an untapped land off the top, we get to draw another card off the Esper Sentinel here. So we get to keep, if they do draw a land for the Divine Purge, we get to keep the Knight Errant in play, and we have 3 creatures as a follow-up. All of our creatures get buffed by the Light Shield Array as well, so... Okay, they didn't draw the 5th land off the top, which is obviously huge for us. So they deluge, try and find a land, obviously. But yeah, I feel like we should be pretty good at this point, because we can just hold on to all of our creatures, attacking with everything, buff our whole board again, and then when they Divine Purge, we just have a really good follow-up, basically. So here, I think I will play the Esper Sentinel out, because that basically cantrips when they play the Divine Purge. We get another draw, hopefully find another land so that we can unlock our hand a little bit more. But yeah, even if, you know, if they have Divine Purge, the Knight Errant survives and goes for lethal. If they have Supreme Verdict, we can just crack the Light Shield Array. Oh wow, they drew a Divine Purge off the top. So do they also have... I mean, even if they also have a Get Lost, we can still just protect it with the Light Shield Array. So they would need... same thing with Fragment Reality, right? So we should just be good to win here. Fragment Reality is the only thing that saves them. And even then, we can just give our Knight Errant hexproof. So definitely think I misplayed on turn... Well, potentially misplayed on turn 1, but still managed to get there, which is pretty sweet. You know, Invasion is such a sick card in this matchup. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, don't have a Convoke card, but this is still a really strong start, right? We got Sentinel on 1, which is good against a number of decks. Then Ornithopter and Thraben Inspector are really good fuels for the Gleeful Demolition, and then Warden of the Inner Sky kind of works as our top end in this hand, right? We can just use that to start scrying. Hopefully find, you know, another top end card like a Convoke card or a case, for example. So very happy to keep this one for sure. Against a Lurrus deck, that could obviously be a number of different things. We'll have to see. So I'm going to run out Sentinel and Ornithopter here. There's maybe an argument to holding on to the Ornithopter, but I don't think it should make too much of a difference, right? The only way we get punished for that is with a sweeper, and I very much doubt there's a Lurrus deck running a sweeper. Okay, Dark Six Shore, so probably against ninjas. Yeah, okay, so we're against ninjas here. So here, we can either go Warden into Inspector or Inspector into Gleeful Demolition. I'm definitely going to lead on the Inspector either way, because that's the, you know, the common denominator. I think I'm just going to go for the Gleeful Demolition, because I don't really want to get hit by a Spell Pierce, right? If we get the Gleeful Demolition out now, then any Spell Pierces that they've got in their hand are just completely dead. The other thing is, Warden of the Inner Sky, I would probably want to tap down to activate stuff, and I really want to keep this Ornithopter back to block, just to shut off their ninjutsu effects, right? Sentinel's also taxing their removal, so if they want to use Fatal Push to take out the Ornithopter, that's really tricky for them to do. Okay, they do have Retrofit Foundry, so they do threaten making a 4/4 at instant speed here because of the Changeling Outcast. But, you know, Warden should be able to put in work here, especially when we drew another 3-but Inspector here. So that just gives us, you know, another 2 permanents on the battlefield to fuel the Warden ability. So we could start attacking here, but I think I'm just going to start activating the Warden, right? Like, I think there's a very good chance they want to use this Changing Outcast to attack and get their ninjutsu effects off, but I also feel like if we attack, they're also fairly happy to just start blocking our stuff with a 4/4, so I'm just going to start activating the Warden here. I don't think we can really afford to activate it for a third time here, because, you know, we really don't want to, even though the Changing Outcast is unblockable, we don't want to let them attack with a Thousand Face Shadow as well, because if they've got 2 cheap ninjutsu cards, they could put in like a Moon Circuit Hacker and the Silver Fur Master, for example. So I definitely want to be blocking the Thousand Face Shadow. Having said that, they can obviously, if I do block the Thousand Face Shadow with Ornithopter, they can obviously ninjutsu in the Silver Fur Master to buff it to a 2/1 and just trade with it in combat. But at this point, the Ornithopter isn't really doing all that much for us, right? We already have enough creatures in play to Convoke, so I would rather just block here, force them to have the Silver Fur Master, and if they do, then, you know, it's not the end of the world for us. Wow, they let us draw off the Esper Sentinel. Interesting. So do they have... I wonder why they did that. Maybe they got 2 ninjutsu effects here. So I'm expecting the Silver Fur Master here. If they do have it, then it's not the end of the world. They could obviously if they do have the Silver Fur Master, them letting us draw with the Sentinel kind of makes sense, because they would want to replay the Changing Outcast on defense, because now they can threaten making a 4/4 again. But this Venerated Loxodon is a sick draw here, obviously. So I'm going to Kuldotha Rebirth here, and then Loxodon, definitely want to Convoke the Esper Sentinel to give it the buff. Then we're going to use the 3 new tokens from Kuldotha Rebirth, and then just another 1/1, I think. And then maybe there's an argument to start attacking here, but I don't know. The opponent's only got 1 card in hand. I don't really want to let them get free value off the off the Outcast here. So here, there's a debate whether I want to put Gigantha into hand or crack the Sunbaked Canyon. I think if I'm going to do the Sunbaked Canyon, I should probably crack it now. But I think I'm just going to put Gigantha into hand, because if we do draw a land off the top, getting a 5/5 in play is a really good way to counteract them making a 4/4 with the Retrofitter Foundry. Now, obviously, they can attack him with both the Changeling Outcast and the Thousand Face Shadow, but we're representing a huge attack on the Crackback, so that's kind of risky for them to do. I mean, again, they can obviously sack the Outcast to the Foundry, so maybe I'm meant to be attacking more aggressively here, but okay, another Loxodon off the top is great. Now we can buff even more of our board to threaten a huge attack, or an even bigger attack on the following turn. I think if I'm going to go for Loxodon, I should probably lead on cracking with the Sunbaked Canyon, just in case we draw like another Sentinel off the top. Okay, Ornithopter is nice. That allows us to block in the air here. So just debating whether I want to tap the Ornithopter. Well, if I'm planning to attack for this turn, then there's a good argument for tapping the Ornithopter for Convoke so that we have more attackers free. But I don't know if I want to attack this turn. I mean, we are leaving a lot of damage on the table. This is an interesting decision point because... Oh, wow, okay, opponent just scoops it up. I mean, either way, I think it's very difficult for them to win from this point, because Ninjas is a deck that wants to trade 1-for-1 in combat and then get ahead on tempo, and us swarming the battlefield so quickly is really difficult for them to beat. So I think this is a matchup where I'm happy to bring in the Strangles. You know, Strangle is here mainly for Wizards, and I'm going to cut Epicure. So in matchups where I don't want to cut the case of the Gateway Express, I usually trim the Epicure if I have other cuts to make, but Strangle is here predominantly for the Wizards matchup. But I think this is another matchup where I want the Strangle because, you know, taking out their turn 1 creature just slows down their ability to get ahead on tempo. I think the only way they win this matchup is with a very fast start, getting a bunch of ninjutsu effects off. So having Strangle just basically cuts them off that. Okay, this hand looks great. We got Strangle, we got Sentinel, we got the turn 2 Loxodon play as well, which I think is the priority, even on the draw. I mean, I guess it depends what creature they lead on here, but... Okay, Fairy Seer, so we don't have to worry about Retrofitter Foundry this turn, which is pretty big. So yeah, obviously, like I said, we can Strangle to cut them off it, but I think it's just better to go proactively. Right, I'm definitely going to lead on the Sentinel here, just attacks their ability to interact with us, but I want to go Sentinel first here, because if they don't interact with our board, if they do just Ninjutsu here, for example, then next turn we can go Novice Inspector, Gleeful Demolition, Venerated Loxodon, which, even if they do have a fast start with Ninjutsu stuff, is going to be so difficult for them to beat. Okay, so they're going to try and find another land here if they don't have one, I guess. Then replay the Fairy Seer, hopefully. And if they do that, we can just pop off with that Loxodon line I just mentioned. 2 to the bottom. Wow, they missed the land drop. Okay, I mean, again, I don't really think it's going to make too much of a difference. Well, that probably shuts the game out for the opponent, but I think the only way they have a chance in this game, even if they have the second land, is if they have land Spell Pierce there. Otherwise, I think we're just going to win, even if they find the second land. Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, this hand looks great. Right, turn 1 Inspector into turn 2 Inspector Rebirth. Knight Errant Evios is a pretty sweet start. We're against Wizards, and annoyingly I've just cut Strangle from my sideboard. Like I'm experimenting with a bunch of different configurations in the sideboard. Had 2 Strangle in there for a while, and I've just cut it for 2 more Thalias for the control matchup, so... We'll have to see how we do without it, but yeah, I do think I want to find room in this sideboard for Strangle, particularly against Dreadhorde Arcanist. Arcanist is such a scary card. But I mean, either way, we still get to get off the Knight Errant Evios here, which is a pretty big deal. So we Kuldotha Rebirth, and then just debating what's better out of the Inspector and the Epicure. I think I want to get Inspector in play here just because it has slightly more toughness. And then also get the Ornithopter in play here as well, because... Doing it like this, we do have a blocker in play for the Arcanist, right? We can soak up at least 1 damage if they don't have a way to kill it. Okay, we hit a Loxodon, which is pretty huge. So now we can potentially Convoke Loxodon next turn. So, I mean, this should hopefully overwhelm Wizards. I mean, having said that, they do have some crazy explosive turns as well, especially if they can buff the Arcanist. Okay, Sleight of Hand, not too concerned about that. Really want to avoid burn spells here if possible. Okay, sick. That's huge. So, not a very explosive turn 2 from the opponent, so we can just go... Novice Inspector, Voldaren Epicure, and then just need to think about what we want to buff here. I do want to attack with the Knight Errant Evios here just to start applying some pressure. I think I'd rather buff the Ornithopters as well, just to be able to force damage through in the air. Also, potentially block some flying creatures, but more important that we can start attacking in the air, even if they do come up the ground slightly. Then we can attack them with the Knight Errant of Eos, and now we just threaten a huge amount of damage next turn. Thankfully, we're still at 18. I think if they had a burn spell last turn, things would be a little bit more dicey here, right? Because they would have probably taken out a couple of our creatures. They would have got in for a decent amount of damage off the Soulscar Mages. I mean, having said that, they still have 2 Soulscar Mages in play, so if they do have, an explosive Arcanist turn, it's going to be tough. Okay, opponent just scoops it up there, so really strong start from us there. Again, really wish I had these Strangles in the sideboard. I mean, Thalia's still reasonable here, I think, so I'm going to trim on a couple of FQs and bring in the Thalias, but yeah. Classic remove or trim a card from the sideboard, and then the matchup that it's for comes up the next game. So yeah, I do think that Wizards hasn't been that common from my experience, but I still think it's one of the best decks in the format, and I do feel like specifically against Dreadhorde Arcanist, I do want some additional removal. Obviously, having 4 Case in the main deck is very big in this matchup, but Strangle is just so much more efficient. Right, being able to take out, as I said, Arcanist is just the card we care about the most. So this hand, obviously not thrilled to keep a 1-lander, but okay, we drew second land off the top, but yeah, having double Sentinel and Thalia here should hopefully help us draw out of this a little bit. Okay, so turn 2 Arcanist, not exactly what we want to see. I think I'm going to run out the Thalia here. Honestly, maybe Thalia is a trap in this matchup. The only reason I brought it in is because I've just added it to the sideboard, so I want to test whether it's good. And it has been reasonable in previous versions, but maybe in this spot it's not great. Yeah, because they can just kill it with a play with fire, then kill the Sentinel on the follow-up. So maybe I'm supposed to just go Inspector into Kuldotha Rebirth that turn instead. So yeah, there's a good chance Thalia is just not good in this matchup. I still think, obviously we can go Inspector into Rebirth, but Esper Sentinel is a card that I want to play as early as possible in general, because as the game goes on and the opponent gets access to more mana, it just becomes generally less effective. But yeah, I do think I misplayed last turn. Well, first of all, I'm not even sure Thalia is that great here. Having said that, it has been decent in other decks that I've tried in this matchup, so that could just be a situation where the opponent having Arcanist plus play with fire was good against our specific board state, so it might still be good. I might keep it in for game 3 if it does go to a game 3 here. Okay, Symmetry Sage is very scary. We do get off Kuldotha Rebirth. We can get a Knight Errant in play here, and I'm going to lead on the Knight Errant just in case we find, for example, another Sentinel or another Ornithopter that we might want to play over one of these Wardens. Okay, we do find a Sentinel, and then I think I'll get another Knight Errant here, but I think we're pretty far behind, right? The difference between being at 18 last game and being at 10 this game means that the opponent can just go super aggressive here if they have, burn spells in hand, for example, because they can obviously buff the Arcanist, and then, oh wow, they got Balmor as well. Yeah, okay, this is almost certainly going to be lethal then, because they can buff the Arcanist, cast the Wizard's Lightning from the graveyards. Not only do they get buffs from the Symmetry Sage, but they also buff their whole board with Balmor as well, so again, think I've maybe misplayed early on with the Thalia. Again, not even sure Thalia is good in this matchup. If I had Strangle in the sideboard instead, that would obviously be the card that comes in. To be fair, I think Thalia might also be better on the play, so I'm going to try it in this game and see how it does. But yeah, I do think I want to keep Strangle in the sideboard. I think it was just a case of, I hadn't faced any Wizards so far with this deck, and there was very few other decks I was bringing Strangle in against, so I wanted to try some other ideas, but I think you always have to respect Wizards in this format, so I think I am going to try and find room to fit a couple of Strangles in the sideboard still. Another card I've been considering is Portable Hold, because that is very nice against decks like Auras, for example, decks that have cheap but bigger creatures that can outscale the Strangle. But the issue there is this slot with Strangle is here mainly specifically for Wizards, and obviously with stock Wizards decks running Flame of Annoy, you don't really want to have Portable Hold just sitting on the battlefield that they can blow up with an additional mode. So I think Strangle's probably the better choice. So this hand is a little bit slower, but with Case of the Gateway Express and the Convoke card, I think it's still a reasonable keep. I'm going to lead on the Knight Errant as opposed to the Venerated Loxodon here because, oh wow, complete whiff. Odds of that are pretty low, not going to lie, but Yeah, I wanted to lead on the Knight Errant so that we could hopefully find more creatures to follow up with a Loxodon play. So here I want to go for Case of the Gateway Express, but I want to put a creature in play first just in case they have a burn spell for one of our creatures. Oh, yikes, they have a Spell Pierce. I mean, that could have been a situation where I could, if I'd been paying more attention to Arena passing priority, I think I could tell they didn't have anything that they could cast at any time like a burn spell. So maybe I'm supposed to just jam it, but the risk there is if they do have a burn spell and they take out one of our creatures, we don't actually kill the Arcanist, which is kind of a disaster, right? I think in most scenarios it's much better to just, go for the Epicure than the case afterwards, but maybe Arena's priority thing was just giving away what they had there, not 100% sure. So going to go in with the full attack here because I feel confident at 17 life that they shouldn't be able to go for lethal on the crackback. And then we obviously have 3 blockers here to try and soak up some damage. We could have obviously put Gigantha in our hand here, but I don't think this game is going to come down to Gigantha, and unnecessarily taking damage off the Sunbaked Canyon is not a good idea here, I don't think. Having said that, I mean, we could have also cracked the Sunbaked Canyon to try and find another 1-drop here, but I think I'm more interested in just cracking a Clue token instead. So that's the reason I didn't put Gigantha in hand, because, there is a chance if Wizards has a very explosive turn here that we could stabilize at 1, and so taking a damage to put Gigantha in hand when I don't think it's likely to come up seems like a mistake to me. Okay, so they're going in for a big attack here. I'm just going to chump with these 1/1s here, just in case they have another burn spell in hand, because even if they play creatures main phase 2, we should still have way more than enough to go for lethal next turn here, so... Okay, we go down to 5... Okay, sweet, we got there, nice.